Yeah, so for people who just joining in, we will start at 3 minutes of 3.
Okay.
Yeah, so looks like we have enough people, and let's get started. Thank you, Varad and David, being with us again from IBM. So maybe you can intro yourself a little bit and have a briefing of the last session. This is a follow-up AMA from the last a good presentation. There was a lot of a question and the thoughts, and feel free to discuss in this session. So over to you, Varad.
Perfect. All right, thanks, David. And yeah, Yuri, so for organizing and arranging the session. So this is the AMA session for the console, right? So the Fabric operations console. So so let me give people an introduction, right? I mean, we covered fairly, not too deeply, but a reasonable level last time, right? In terms of how to set up and, how to run it and everything. So I will probably take about 10-15 minutes of the first, session talking about, again, the console and the intro, some of the things we covered last time, so people have a context, right? And then we will dive into any questions you guys might have, right? So and then we'll cover it. And I am Varad Ramamoorthy. I'm the one of the lead architects for the console. I work for IBM. David, if you want to introduce.
Hey, yeah, I'm David Huffman. I work with Varad. I've done a lot of the back-end work and APIs sort of stuff for IBP.
Great. Thanks, David. Yeah, anything API, that you see in the code, it all came from David. So, so on the console, again, quickly, right? So people currently, of course, use Hyperledger Fabric, for setting up, again, their orders, peers, and CAs and such, right? And what the console helps with and does is managing the Fabric side of things, right, in an easy to use interface, right? So you can do again, I'm not going to go through each of these bullets, but you can again manage your Fabric, like create channels and install chain code and use the 2.0 lifecycle and update the channel and a lot of those Fabric things. And what I'm sure people ask, like, can I create components, right? That's no, you cannot, right? And that's one of the things that we will be having an interface for at some point, right? At the moment, there is, that's not something you can do within the open source, but there are other ways to do it, right? So what, again, high level architecture diagram, right? You got the browser, and console is what we are talking about in this context, right? And console talks to your peers and orderers using a gRPC proxy. What the gRPC proxy does is it kind of translates the request. You can submit it in HTTP, protocol, right? But then we will talk back in gRPC, like back to the orderers and peers, right? Like this picture. And we again will also proxy the calls via config translator. Again, the reason being you need to have all of it in the same domain, and if you're doing local development and simpler setup, you don't need to have Nginx or something running, but instead you can proxy the call over to config translator. And this the backing database is Couch in this case, right? So that's kind of a quick architecture, right, diagram. And in terms of running the console, it's fairly straightforward, right? That is basically clone a three-step process, really. So the first part is setting up the network itself, right? That's, in this case, we use the test network from Fabric, right? So if you look in the scripts, the setup script, network script, you will see, all the commands it uses, like, cloning it and changing it to like 223 and, provisioning it, right? It's been fairly consistent, right? So you can set up a network. And then the second part is, setting up the console. Basically the stuff we just saw, right? Like, which is console, it will create CouchDB, it'll create gRPC proxies, and it'll create config translator, all in Docker Compose, right? And then that's basically the second part of it. What the third part is basically the create asset, right? What the create asset will do is it'll take the existing running test network and then create a JSON files that the console is able to take, and so you can just simply import them, so that the console is tied to, I guess, the Fabric components, right? That's kind of the three-step process. And once you do that, again, you can go through the steps to basically create certificates. We can briefly see some of that. But what I did in advance is I ran the setup network script, as you can see, to save some time, right? So this is all, again, going to Fabric samples and then creating a network, nothing specific that's console in this case. And then the next step we would do is, console up. What this will do is it'll again go via the Docker Compose. It'll download the, it already downloaded before, right? The console image, and then start that up. And then the last step, the third step, right, is creating the asset. Again, this will connect to the existing network, right? The test network, and then massage the files and create these, JSON files, and then put them in a zip file so you can simply import them into the console, right? At this point, that's all it took, right? So other than creating the network, it should literally take, like, depending on if the image is downloaded or not, a couple of seconds, literally, right? Once the assets are created, you should be able to simply import. So not that one. So you would go to localhost 3000. That's where it'll be running. And the default is admin and password, right? And immediately upon login, you're required to change the password. Just a pointer, like, some people indicated, like, at least for local development, they don't want to go through this process. They want to be able to, like, just, directly go to the console without doing the change password screen on the fresh install. That's something we will add, like, in the future. But for now, you need to change the password. That's it, right? So once you change the password, you are in. This allows you to import an existing peer order or CA, again, we talk to the backend using gRPC web, right? So as long as you have configured gRPC web in front of your orders and peers, you should be able to talk to it, right? So I'm going to import it, right? I'm going to spend like maybe 4 minutes and then switch over. So within the console, there is work area, right? And then if you go in, there is a create console assets. That's the new zip file that we just created. Then you import it, right? So that should import the components. So if you go to the nodes, you should see this is basically all the components from the test network again, right? The peers order CAs, and you can basically go into the CA and then This will create an identity, which is basically the certificates to talk to the password, incorrect password. So once I'll enroll an identity, right? Arg1 admin PW, that's the default. For the test network, right? Arg1 admin. And so we'll do the same for orderer quickly. I'm not going to go through the second one, all of that, but let's just connect at least the minimum orders in here so you can see what it gives you from context. Again, I'm going to enroll, create an identity / certificate for the orderer. Orderer admin. Again, I'm going through quickly. This is not like super complicated, but so now that we created the identities for the orderers and the organization one, we can simply associate it, right? So and when you associate, we already know based on the root cert that this peer has what are the allowed certificates in your wallet that you can use. So notice that you didn't see orderer's identity. That's it, right? So now we are able to connect and talk to the test network peer. Now we are able to see that it has my channel, which was already created, and you see that using the 2.0 format, we have a chain code installed on the peer, and the again the hash of that chain code, the package ID, you can see all of it from here. And let me associate it with the orderer, like using the certificate we just created. So now you can, so this is a view of your system channel, right? Where we see that the orderer has one admin, and then you have consortium members like Arg1 and Arg2, and you see that in the consenter set, we have just one node. If you have multiple nodes in the cluster, you will see all of them listed here. Again, just one node. So again, the one last thing before I will stop for questions is you can go into the channel, right? And you see all the channel capabilities, order capabilities, and application capabilities, and the block height, and you can do the transaction views. And again, I won't go through the flow, but you can easily follow the the install, approve, commit process that Fabric 2.0 lifecycle gives you, right? So you are able to do that, right, directly from the console without going through command line and knowing what the the payload is for the commit process and all that stuff, right? So it makes it super easy to use it for again, like managing your Fabric without, again, command line business, right? That's the key thing. So I mean, again, we can go into details if people want like specific topics, but this kind of gives you a high level overview of console and what it does, and where it connects. So then we will open up for questions, right? So let's see. How can I connect to different clouds and on-premise nodes to the same network, right? So the console does allow you to connect to nodes from anywhere, really, right? As long as you have a gRPC web in front of it, you can import any node, right? I can, in this console, even though I'm running locally, I can have node running somewhere else, like in IBM Cloud or Azure or wherever, and then simply import it, right? It's a JSON-driven thing, right? So the network term is kind of, in some ways, in my view, overloaded, right? So network is just a logical definition. There is no real network, right? I mean, you can have one peer talking to two different ordering services, right? And you can have channels from, on the same peer from two different ordering services. So I guess the network is kind of loose. But the point is, if you have peers, orders, CAs, whatever the, those fabric components, it can be running anywhere. As long as you put gRPC in the front and expose it, you should be able to import it into console and manage them without too much trouble, right? Lino, did I explain it, or do you have further questions? You can unmute. So you can,
sorry, yes, you did. I believe my follow-up question is are all the nodes need to be on the same version of Fabric?
Not necessarily. It depends on, like, so you need a lowest common denominator, right? So you can on the same console have 1.4 and 2.0 peers and orderers. So it's all channel driven at the end of the day, right? What does the channel do? So you can have two channels with 1.4 capability and 2.0 capability. So you can manage, if the question is, can I manage different nodes with different levels on the same console? Yes, you can. So we support 1.4 lifecycle and the 2.0 lifecycle, both of them. So you can, so like right now I have a channel with 2.0 capability. So you see stuff that's relevant for 2.0. But if you have a channel with 1.4 capability, you will see a slightly different console that shows, again, the 1.4 view of it, I guess. Okay, and then participating is not savvy enough to deploy their own node on a provenance project. Is there an option lightweight should be? Yeah, so you can manage it, right? If the client is not savvy enough, you can still they can. I mean, if they're able to use the UI, you can host the UI anywhere, and you can have the components wherever, and they don't have to be in the same network, right? So, and then what parts of console is IBM making open source, right? So what IBM is making open source is all of the things you just saw, right? What we did not open source is the operator component that allows you to provision. So the internal IBM, not internal, I should say. So the IBM version of open source offering, support offering, that's the offering IBM has, that allows you to create peers and orders and CAs and manage their resources, and you can change like the peer resource and ordering resource and all that stuff, right? So that's the Kubernetes aspect, right? That part is in open source, the console is. That's a good question. And then, so, okay. And then the Yuri from Google, how does console wallet work? Is it in a CouchDB wallet? No, so one of the requirements we had way back when we started the console development, right, is to not manage the keys and certificates for a customer, right? That puts us at a, I don't know, some customers did not like it, some customers are okay with it. But so what we said was, we won't store and manage the certificates in any database, right? So when you import or create the wallet, it's only in the browser's local storage, right? So it's not in CouchDB. So one thing we were considering, is to integrate with some of the cloud-based solutions, right? So like, for example, IBM has certificate manager, and Amazon has its own, right? So integrating with some of those solutions. So again, the certificates are maintained elsewhere, but when you log in, we pull the certificates from wherever the provider and use it. But that's not something we do today. But it's the answer is we currently only store it in the local storage wallet, right? We're interacting with the network with the newly created identity. How can we instantiate chain code? If you need to, whose certificate exists on the channel config, right? So you do, of course, yes, need the, so if you have 1.4, right, And if you have Node OU, things are simplified a lot, right? So that's one of the critical things, right? So if you have Node OU enabled, as long as you get a certificate, like what we just did, right? So that applies to 1.4 also. So, which is, I did not import a specific certificate. I created it, one using admin type, right? And I was able to, like, again, interact with the peers in order. So, so you don't need the specific admin cert, if you have Node OU enabled. If not, then you need to make sure the wallet, right, contains, it's a JSON format, right? So the wallet has the private public key pairs to work with the peer. So, Nazari, did I explain your question? Did I answer your question? Okay, so I assume yes. So is it possible to support with the console basic maintenance like certificate revocations and renewals? No, that's one of the things that wasn't open source. It's part of the operator. So anything that you need to have Kubernetes or some kind of infrastructure to, like, manage the certificates, so there is no CLI or there is no command or approach that Fabric gives you for certificate renewal, right? You need to actually renew the certificate and have it on the disk, right? So there is no API for certificate renewal from Fabric, which is why the console cannot do it. And that's where you need the operator, right, to do some of those business. So no, so the so we purely, abstract the maintenance of Fabric from, again, channel, chain code, and then, like, if you are talking about CA, you can get, of course, like we just saw, creating certificates, right, identities and such. But anything that touches Kubernetes or Docker directly, that Fabric does not have an API for, that's done by our operator. And that's not part of the open source. So does console support HSM? Great question. So the images, again, this goes to IBM's. IBM, with our support offering, we build certified images, that support HSM. So those images supported. Console doesn't quite care about HSM, even though it does allow you to work with HSM. But again, obviously, that HSM, you are not going to have the certificates locally, right? The private keys. So for the console to talk to HSM enabled peers, you still need a certificate on local. So the console doesn't do direct HSM, if that makes sense. So you still need certificates. Console doesn't have like a the clients to talk to HSM. It's all happening on the browser, right? How can I manage external intermediate CA? So so you could have again, you could have two different CAs, right? External, intermediate CAs in the console, two different ones, right? And again, the support offering that we have allows you to provision and manage the Fabric CA, the server YAML and all that stuff, right? So that's all possible. So console does, like, within the MSP definition, when you create one, so you could, let me actually do that, right? Or test MSP. So what it will show is you pick a CA. You can see that, right? So we populate with what the root cert is for that CA, but you do have the flexibility to add your other root certs and TLS certs. So if you have intermediate CAs, right, you can include their certificates also, right? And if you export it, you get even more flexibility, right? You can freeform, like, include the like multiple certificates and just make up your own MSP definition, right? So yeah, so I think the console does allow you to use the intermediate CAs if that's what you have. Okay, so the next question regarding Node.OU, it only works with some operations like install, but instance it works on channel. So the channels also have Node.OU. So if you go into the console, let me show you. So if you go into the channel specifically, right, and then go to the channel details, you can see that in this case, I have org1 and 2, and both have Node.OU. So the Node.OU is applicable for the install side where the peer itself has config YAML that dictates your Node.OU configuration. And then the channel also within the MSP definition, have Node.OU. So let me quickly show you since we, so this is a cool capability you have in console. So once you have console, let's say you drill down into a channel, right? So you can add debug, I can spell it right. So debug in front of the URL. And what you will see is, right, there is a new option that will show up called Open Channel Config. This is incredibly useful because, again, you don't have to go to CLI to download and decode and all that business. So what I was going to show you was, right, so org1 MSP. So if you look at the org1 MSP definition, and then if you keep drilling down, you see this section, right, within the MSP. So you see the organizations right there, right? So part of the channel config is also Node.OU, and again, it's configured with enable true in this case, which is why the console shows that information. And since we are on this page, right? So you can inspect like the policies, and it's basically the entire channel config dump. Like you see that the anchor peer is such, right? For that organization. So you see all of these information. Again, it's super helpful for debugging purposes. And so yes, so Node.OU is applicable for both the the admin of the peer and also on the channel. Decentralized orders, great question, right? So so you could have distributed orders and peers. So within the console, you can, like, let me drill down into the order. So, so you can see within the ordering nodes. So these nodes can be from different clouds and different MSPs, right? So let's say by default, of course, we have orderer MSP, and you want orderer MSP2 or something, some other person or organization is managing that orderer. What you can do is you can add the ordering service administrator, the MSP, so you can let them send you the MSP definition. You can import that into the organization tab, and then you can say, I want to add that additional organization as a, like, let's say org1 MSP is the, even though it's not right in this case, right? That's a newly added organization that want to contribute some of the orders. So you can simply add them, right? Add them to the orderer admin, and the moment you add it to the list of ordering service administrators, right, they can now add their own, again, their own orderers to the cluster, and you can now have orders from different organizations, different cloud providers, if you want it to be, and then manage them directly from the console. Okay, so decentralized orders, yep, that's possible. Yeah, so you can, okay, that's another question. So you're distributing orders into channels, not particularly peers. So when you go into a channel, right? Great questions, by the way. Love it. So when you go into the channel, you can edit the channel, right? And it's not going to show that in this case, right? So when you go to the, I'll keep going to the next screen, what I was going to show. So, right. Oh, okay. So since I don't have multiple orders, so the ordering services, right? So if you, we do allow you to update the consenter set on the channel. That's the important bit, right? So since I have only one node in the whole thing, right? I don't have the ability to do that. But if you have multiple consenters, right? Then you can pick and choose which of the ordering nodes you want to be a consenter on the channel. And then you can join the channel to the relevant peers you want to, like, only certain peers are on certain channels, right? But the point is, I guess, the orderers are distributed, you can associate different consenters in different channels. And that's something the console allows you to do. Again, since I have a single ordering node system, right, you cannot see that. But again, that's possible. All right. So any other questions people have, right? Really good questions. I love the session. Okay. So if there are some, David, I guess Huffman, right? And if you want to show, so one of the things I know people have asked in the past that I'm bringing up, how do I set up the console to do TLS, right? Because obviously the default is non-TLS. And one pointer I would like to make is, right, if you access console in non-TLS fashion, anything that's not localhost, right? I don't know, varad.ibm.com or whatever, right? In non-TLS, it won't work properly because there is a security package that David can talk about, right? We use that'll only work when you are in TLS mode, unless again you are in localhost mode, right? So let me stop sharing for a bit and then let David show you guys how to configure console for TLS, right? So stop sharing. Okay, so David.
Okay, let me set up my screen. All right, so to set up TLS, you need to configure two environmental variables. There's a README that talks about all these environmental variables and settings and whatnot, and it's in this path. You can see in the top. Let me make this bigger. The top of this left panel, packages, Athena, environment, README. We scroll down to these two guys. These are the guys to set for providing your own TLS file for the web server. And they have a tricky behavior. If you set this path to a key that does not exist, then it will actually just create a self-signed cert for you at that location. So if you already have a proper cert, put the cert somewhere in the file system that's in the repo, and then point these at that. So this is your private key, this is your certificate file. And then if you don't have a cert and you just want to make a self-signed one just to get through it, you can just point this to a blank or a non-existent file. And then when it starts, it will create a self-signed certificate. So I'll show that actually. So where's my copy paste thing? So on the right here, I'm just showing you, pretend these are your environmental variables that you would set up. I have a script that will just load these into my environment. So you would set these wherever you want for whatever OS you're running. And I'm pointing at this particular folder. And if we look at that folder, it does not have those files in it. So what we expect to see is when we start the server, it should create these files. So from this directory, we can just do npm start. And Athena is the name of the web server. So we're inside the repo packages and then Athena for the web server. And then when we start it, it will log a bunch of stuff and it will show us that it created some certificates. There's a little silly log that will print out here, silly level. So this level, so it started the app on port 3000 and there's an S at the end of that. So we know it did TLS. And we look up a little bit, there's some logs about it saying that the TLS cert wasn't found, so it's going to generate it. And if I open that directory, we can see new files, so that's good. Go to the browser. So it said it was at 3000, I'm on local, right? So localhost, oh, I need to put HTTPS in front. Okay, and then of course, since it's a self-signed cert, I get this little warning saying I need to accept it. And we can, it's probably good just to look at the cert real quick. And you know it's one of our auto-generated certs because it has this in the organization field. So that looks good, so I'll just accept that. And then it'll prompt me to enter the console, and now it's just kind of business as usual. I can log in with a user I've created, and I'm in my console. So that's TLS. And again, if you have a proper cert, one that's signed by a third party, you would just point this path to somewhere in the file system to that cert. All right, stop on the server. So any questions on that? Actually, where is the chat? There's the chat.
Yeah, I'm looking at chat, David, so no questions yet.
Okay, great. So TLS done. What else should we do? So we can talk about some of the settings that people might want to change. So a lot of the default settings are, pretty good defaults, but they might not fit for some circumstances. So the default file is here. It's in packages, the Athena, JSON docs, default setting docs. This is where you can see all the default values, but I don't recommend changing it here. If you changed it here and then you try to do like a git pull or something, you might have some sync issues. So this is kind of the reference of what we're pushing out. If you want to change these, you create a config file, and the config file is your scratch pad of overriding these settings. So in my case, I have a config file that I'm using config DSH, and these are some of the overrides I've already set. And let's go through some of the ones that you might want to do. So one of the ones we get talked about a lot is the rate limiting. So on the left here, I can pull up more information. So there's two rate limiters in this setup. One is for all the APIs that the browser is going to do, like when you're logged in as a user. And the other rate limit is for API keys. So if you're scripting to the server, you're doing lots of different calls, you can set the rate limits independently. So if you don't expect to have any API key calls, there's no scripts calling the server, you could set this low to make it a little tighter. And if you have a whole bunch of components and you're browsing the UI and things start happening that are weird, you start looking into the logs and you see you're hitting rate limits, then you could bump this up. And so again, you wouldn't edit it in the default settings, but you could just put this in your config file as So the config file is a YAML, so we just do like that, and we could set this to 102 or whatever. So that's how you would override any setting. Just whatever the setting is verbatim, put it in a config file, and then the server will look for this file and override the defaults on startup. So that's the rate limit. So that's good to know if you're hitting odd problems. And the problems you would see if you're hitting this, they're most easily seen from the server logs. You're going to see 429 codes, and you're going to see it being noisy, saying, you know, this client has hit too many requests in a minute. And yeah. Another setting that you might want to change is the app port. So we default to 3000. This is the internal port that you're binding to. So if you want to bind to a different port, you just change that and it'll bind to a different port. And then we have a bunch of timeouts or fabric related calls that are good to know. Let's look at it in the README. Right. So over here on the left panel, where I'm highlighting, these are various fabric calls and their timeouts for the client side stuff. So some of these will have a similar timeout on the peer side or an ordering service side, orderer node. So you want to update both places if you're running into these timeouts, depending on which one you're hitting, right? So all these are only going to change the client side. So if you're in the browser and it says something timed out, you might want to look into one of these settings to bump up the timeout, depending on what's going on. And then you also might need to bump it up on the peer if it's hitting that timeout within the peer process. So once you can control getting a block, that's usually very quick. Shouldn't really take you more than 10 seconds. If it's having difficulty, you can bump it up. All these are in milliseconds, so you can see 10,000. If you want to instantiate chain code or smart contract, this is the 1.0 lifecycle stuff. That can take quite a bit of time depending on what type of smart contract you're running. So this might be one to look at to bump up. And this is definitely one you want to also bump up on the peer because it has its own timeout for letting that process start up. And there's one for joining a channel. So peer joining to the channel. And then there's one for installing the chain code. So that's just loading the binary onto the file system for the peer. And then we got two that are for the 2.0 lifecycle stuff that Fabric 2 has, version 2. So one is installing the chain code. It's a different operation than the previous one because it uses the lifecycle chain code. And then there's another one for getting the package out. So you got those two options. And then there's kind of a fallback of any other timeout that we're using. There's a 10-second default for that one. And one more setting to look at is lockout. The lockout limit is how many failed password logins you can have before that IP gets blacklisted for, I think it's only 5 minutes. But if you see you getting 401s, even though you have the right password, you can see this in the server logs that you're being locked out. And if you're doing dev or just doing something funky, maybe you don't care to have a lockout limit, you could bump this up to something crazy. I believe 0 would also disable it too. But yeah, if you're hitting that problem, you could play around with this value. And I think that was all the settings that I want to talk about. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yep, perfect.
I'm going to stop sharing that. And Varad, you want to talk about something else?
Yeah, maybe. So are there questions from people? I mean, we can talk about a lot of different things. You know, want to make sure we covered what people are interested. If there are questions. Okay. If not, there is next topic we can cover. Which is local development, right? Some people have asked, you know, how do I do local development, right? That's a topic. So let me cover some stuff on that, right? Because, you know, as you are trying things and doing things, right, you know, that may come in handy. I know a couple of people contributed some code, and it would be nice for everybody to know what that is, right? So if you look at the repo, right, quickly the repo structure, right? So within the console, we use Lerna, right? That's like a that helps with managing all these multiple packages, right? When you have a mono repo kind of scenario, there are multiple components. So if you look in the packages, is where the main components are, right? So there is Apollo, Athena, and Stitch. So Apollo is the UI component, right? That's where all the React stuff is, right? If you're trying to develop something, if you're learning React or good with React, we would love to have you contribute stuff, right? So it's all React based, and Athena is the quote unquote back end of it, right? Which is again node based, right? It's a node component, and Stitch, we won't cover too much right now. It's slightly advanced, I feel like, but what it is it's a protobuf really that that's converted to JavaScript, right? There is a process where the protos get converted to JavaScript, and that's how we talk to the peers and orders using gRPC. We don't use Node SDK. We don't use Java SDK. We have our own, again, the protobuf mechanism using JavaScript. Everything directly goes from the browser to the backend, right? Again, it's we will schedule a different call for that, but just be aware that there are 3 different components that are in play here, right? And Lerna is the one that's kind of stitching things together. So again, if you're trying to do local development, what we have, if you go to the end of the the README, you see a couple of things, right? So you install Lerna, right? That's the first step, and then next you do the bootstrap, right? It will basically do the npm install under the covers, right? You do the clean, which will delete it, and then you do the bootstrap. And then when you do, again, if you're purely doing server-side development, that's Athena, of course, right? Which is, this command. And the client side, also development, if you want to do it, then it's the dev Apollo. So dev Apollo would run the, again, live React, and then it'll also start the server. It'll have it all set up when you do that. So in my local, for demonstration purposes, right, I started, Lerna run dev, and when you do that, it will run on port 4002. And again, it's a clean console. What I was going to show, right, is how do I know the components? Where do I get those components to be imported, right? So once you provisioned and started the components, right? So if you go look under the repo, there is a work area, right? And you should see assets, and obviously the asset we imported is console_assets, right? And let's just pick is CA, right? org1 CA. And what you see inside of that JSON, right? This is the generator JSON. Of course, when you rerun the whole thing, this is going to go away, and then it'll generate a new one. But what you see inside is these endpoints, right? So it's again CA_org1, because that's how the service is set up under Docker Compose, right? So that's how that network is known. But if you're doing local development where you have console running locally, you want to be able to reach to it directly, so you would change these to localhost, for example, right? So you would change those, and then what I'm going to do, just for demonstration purposes, is to import them, right? Or that specific one. So CA, import that, add a file, and within the work area assets, and we modified the file under certificate authority, right? We did change org1 CA, and then imported, we ignored the location, right? It doesn't, I mean, you can choose the different location, if you want to say it's OpenShift or just plain Kubernetes, right? And that's up to you. It doesn't matter. It's just display purposes, really, right? And then that's it, right? So the component got imported, and you can click on it, and you can drill down and say like, oh, I want to generate a certificate from this CA, right? Boom, right? So and now you have the component imported, you have a development system running, right? Let's say I just want to, I don't know, change change some stuff, right? I don't know, peer available message or something, right? So I go somewhere. It's not a very useful demo, but I just want to demonstrate that you can change it, and the changes will be live, right? I don't know, test, update, right? Change it so it should do, compile under the covers. That's live, and then the page reloaded. But let me see. Right. There, right? So the test message. So it's live reload. So you can quickly do development and check it. You don't have to go through the whole build and all that. So you simply start that endpoint, the Lerna endpoint, and you can add a component or whatnot. Again, the source code wise quickly. For the UI again, right? Like we just saw, it's under the packages, Apollo, and then you have all the source code, right? Under components, right? There's a ton of components you will see, right? It's hopefully fairly, self-describing, I guess, right? In terms of the names and what they mean. But you can, of course, do inspect and the usual things people do with React development. You should be able to follow and then identify the component and make a change and all that stuff, right? So, and then for Athena, again, same things apply, right? So there is a file watcher that goes on that watches the file changes. So it should, if you go into the Athena folder, again, all the server code is here, right? So you make whatever the change, it should restart the server. Then you should be able to see the changes right away, right? So that's kind of like a. So all the ports and everything, just to mention, right, are set up. Again, the config file David was showing, right? The under ENV, under Athena, there is a dev.json that points to config file which has all the YAML changes that David was showing. So this file is set up so that it works locally. So you can have both of the consoles running at the same time. You can have the one that's provisioned from again the Docker image, or you can run the local development both at the same time, right? And this UI I'm just showing was connecting to the test network that was on, right? So you can quickly import that test network into a local development, not just the Docker-based one, and then develop stuff and try things, right? I think that's a cool thing to do. Let's see, what other questions? Right, so does these messages have internationalization structure set up? Yes, right, that's basically, so we don't push the translated content into the public repo, but if you go into Apollo and then source assets, then there is IAT and internationalization, say it multiple times. You can add other language-based folders and then push the message bundle, and then the message just stays on, and you will have your translation, right? So yeah, so that is possible. So it's built in, and we just don't have the translated files in there. Okay.
That's cool. So maybe just a time check. We almost end of the top of the hour. So thank you so much, Varad and David Huffman being here, contributed time asking the question. So for the audience, please go ahead to the Meetup comment, leave your comments the page, leave your comment what topic or question you continue to type there. So Varad and David probably can pick it up, see if there's a future section we can schedule. Certainly, like Varad, you mentioned, there's so much thing we can talk about. So yeah, please feel free to fire all the question after you tried out the console yourself.
Yeah, thank you guys. This is a really good audience. I enjoyed the questions, and again, if you have more questions, of course, leave a comment into the Meetup, and then we'll follow up with you guys, right? Thanks everybody again. Bye.
Yeah, awesome. Everyone have a good day. Bye.
Bye.